belt connects to land, the road moves on the sea. The promise that they hold is joint prosperity. We're breaking barriers, we're making history. The war we're dreaming of starts with you and me. The future's coming now. The belt and road is how we share the goodness now. The belt and road is how when traders open up, that's when the sharing starts. Resources changing hands and shipping out of wars. Ideas start to flow and friendships start to form. Then seems impossible all becomes a norm. The future's coming now. The belt and road is how we share the goodness now. The belt and road is how.
好冷啊！吃火锅喽！
你们烂着我们，之前都凑不到一个队，后面还。
半个月可能我们那边也会下雪了。
你那边会，我那边不会。
不是啊，那个博尔，
博尔，我以为你是老家。
找到一家中餐馆，莲花师傅。牛肉炒河粉，麻婆豆腐，水煮牛肉。塞尔维亚驻波黑大使馆。
欧洲的田野。
欧洲生活就该单调。
终于到家了。新厨房投入使用了。这边个大吃柜。 一窝小奶狗。
Hello everyone and welcome to the first Symposium of Curatorial Inquiry as you go roads under your feet towards the new future. The symposium is organized by What Could Should Curating Do and Moderna Galerija in Ljubljana. It is also co-streamed in collaboration with our partner cells within the projects, and they are Rockbund Art Museum from Shanghai, Times Museum in Guangzhou, ArtCom platform from Astana and Almaty, and the Public Library in Bor. Dobar dan I dobrodošli u prvi simpozijum projekta Novim putovima u novu budućnost. My name is Biljana Ciric and I'm the founder of What Could Should Curating Do and initiator of the inquiry. While I'm speaking, I'm standing on the land of Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people. I'm standing in the Monash Museum of Art Gallery here in Melbourne in Australia. I would like to start with acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm standing on. And today I will be offering my own personal acknowledgement. And reads thus. I pay respect to the First Nation people, land and ancestors, indigenous knowledges and beliefs and understanding of the world that throughout 2020 I learned so much from. I pay my deepest respect to indigenous relationality with lands, waters, human and non-human life, and I'm grateful to all colleagues and peers, indigenous and non-indigenous, who guided me through challenging year and gifted me with the knowledge and belief that shaped mode of working and thinking together in this inquiry. While I'm speaking, please write on Facebook from where are you streaming so we can try to situate you. As You Go, Roads Under Your Feet Towards the New Future is a long-term project and a research inquiry that reflects on Belt and Road Initiative and how it will alter the aesthetics and practice of everyday life in the different local contexts. I conceived and initiated this project in 2019 after conducting curatorial research in East Africa, Central Asia and a number of Balkan countries where the project is currently situated. The title of the project, As You Go, Roads Under Your Feet Towards the New Future, refers to the roads under our feet. These roads could be understood as visible infrastructure built through BRI in different local contexts, present in metro lines, fast-speed trains, railways and bridges. They connect society, enable the movement of people, goods, raw material, and faster extraction. But the title also refers to roads that we are building through the project. Roads that are ours, built through walking with and thinking with, leaving marks on grass and flowers that could grow back and make our path invisible again. Our roads are playing between invisible and visible, permanence and transience. Our walk is slow and long, most likely done on foot, but it's not a run. It is careful walk, trying to be conscious of the world under our feet, making each step lighter, acknowledging the world below. And here there is a brief introduction of what is BRI. The Belt and Road Initiative, formerly known as One Belt, One Road, you can see the first map, stands as a global infrastructure development strategy adopted by Chinese government in 2013 that invests in nearly 70 countries and international organizations around the world. Through the second map that you will see that it's an extremely dynamic project. Besides Maritime Road and the one on the land, you also have Pakistani Economic Corridor as well as a military base. And the last map, also refers to different infrastructural projects, including gas lines, pipelines, railways, and the Maritime Road goes all to New Zealand. During the 2020, there is a new health Silk Road that is conceived and initiated that provides a number of countries assistance dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And these are some of the lists. The project does not attempt to pose yet another critical investigation in Chinese colonialism, but rather seeks to unpack the complexity these regions are dealing with through the current connection to BRI, also leading itself to the established commonalities. These include socialism, non-aligned legacies, geopolitical setting, economical influence, being agent of its own culture, as well as current COVID-19 pandemic. China in the last 2 decades, as an outcome of global capitalist machinery, has turned into the new beast that I both respect and worries me. My walk in these places is my attempt to understand whether China is simply using the same colonial tools employed by West in the past 200 years, or there is more to it. Many of our inherited connections are the outcome of top-down strategy deeply embedded in the Cold War policies of 60s and 70s. My walk, as well as our walk, ask whether this new Cold War slowly unfolding in front of us, caused by pandemic, can usher the connection that no nation-state can control, one which we need, and those which are truly ours. It is exploration into a solidarity that diminishes the difference between the providers and beneficiaries, where providers are usually wealthy and beneficiaries are poor with the problems. The importance of bodily knowledge I acquired by walking through and listening within these places, encountering people with different social experiences and knowledge backgrounds, was not only crucial for my understanding of local context, processes of industrialization and modernization the BRI has brought to these localities. The aspect of knowing through body, being there, walking and working shaped the project, giving emphasis to proximity. This process also helped me understand my own limitations that led to an urgency to expand what curating does and can do. And thus, the inquiry is structured as a long-term research over a period of 3 years to research cells of organizations, institutions, and individuals. And they are: What Could Should Curating Do from Belgrade, Moderna Galerija from Ljubljana, Rockbund Art Museum from Shanghai, Guangdong Times Museum from Guangzhou, ArtCom platform from Astana and Almaty, Robel Temesgen, artist based in Addis Ababa, Sinkneh Eshetu, landscape architect and writer based in Addis Ababa, and public library in Bor in Serbia. Research cells vary from small-scale, single-person organizations, state, private museums, the difference produced by their various roles and voices within respective local context being not only important when considering the politics of knowledge production, but also crucial for premises of this project. The configuration of the cells or partners within the project did not all come together to the mutual understanding or friendship, common values that the partners share. I'm friends with some of them personally, but on the other hand, some of them are collaborators or people whose work I have known and respected or could relate for some time. These cells came together upon my invitation to the project. That invitation was sent to cells, knowing that they could recognize certain potential within the relationship and possibly to gain something out of it. That something is very different for each single cell. Each partner came with its own intention to learn, to unlearn, to become visible or invisible, and to relate to international community. What we all share is a discomfort how the international has been performed through contemporary art practices, and a collective desire to create pathways for working and imagining otherwise. In February 2020, sometime over a year ago, partner cells have met for the first time in Addis Ababa to discuss how we will be working together, just before pandemic has been announced. Since then, being together, we have experienced civil and political unrest in most of the localities. Researchers falling ill due to COVID-19 and thankfully recovering. Civil war in Ethiopia, which escalated in November 2020. Our colleagues losing their positions. Funding of our partner cells being cut or taken away. This project stretches our emotions and our endurance is challenged on a daily basis. Yet we continue to work together. Research continues silently, acknowledging the importance of being together during the separation imposed on us. And that separation is not only physical, but also ideological, informed by shifting geopolitics caused by the pandemic. And here I would like to extend my gratitude to individuals who believe in the project, and that belief shaped this project by their presence, giving time, energy and care, creating space for project to take the root in them and their institutions. Zdenka Badovinac from Moderna Galerija, Nikita Inchencaev from Times Museum, Laris Frogier from Rockbund Art Museum, Robel Temesgen, Sinkneh, Eshetu, Aigerim Kapar from ArtCom platform, as well as Dragan Stojmenovic from the Public Library in Bor. Cells are always represented by the same above-mentioned individuals. They are museum directors, chief curators, artists, founders of the spaces, practitioners. As partner cells, among those who have a stable internet connection over the last year, we meet every 2 weeks. We needed the time to acknowledge that basic functionality is not the same for everyone, and to negotiate how to create the space within the project to embrace this unevenness and not recognize it as a deficit. Creating and nurturing that relational space over a year also directed partner cells to respect the knowledge they may not have access to recognize it and build trust in other partner cells in the way they talk about it, to acknowledge their own urgencies as well as the knowledge situated within different cells that are still not part of our individual knowledge structures. This is the point where the spatial condition for multiplicity slowly emerges. In the last day of Symposium, we will be sharing and reflecting on some of the aspects of working together. During the Symposium, representatives of cells will be moderating individual sessions. Since the April 2020, due to pandemic, we have employed the strategies Dig Where You Stand, and we have been working with 15 researchers across Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ethiopia, Serbia, Slovenia, and China. The research inquiry has been developed trying to listen local urgencies and learn from them. This symposium will be the first public presentation of situated research currently undergoing. And last, I would like to lead you through the key aspects of how we walk together. And they are horizontality, intimacy and right to opacity, and interdependence. Partner cells are imbalanced in their scale, age, experience, and that structural ambivalence is a challenge to work around when proposing horizontality across our relationship. As an initiator of the project, one of my responsibilities is to develop the partner's comfort zone from where we speak and act within the project. For that process, certain level of intimacy is needed between the partner cells that creates a safe zone to speak up uncertainties. This zone is very different for each partner cell and their local context. That horizontality is also manifested through economical structure of the project, which I consider my own responsibility. Economy is a basic condition for project to happen, and through proposing radical transparency, when speaking about its economic means, the cell practice horizontality. The first stage of the project has been supported by Foundation for Art Initiatives. Part of the funding have been distributed to partner cells who do not have economical means to work within the project. Additional funding has been provided by the partner cells who are able to provide financial support to individual researchers across different local contexts. Intimacy and opacity. To practice intimacy between the cell, opacity is needed rather than visibility. That intimacy defines how ideas are shared and to what extent. Visibility is defined and controlled by the way the Western economy of discourse work hand in glove with the global economy. Many of these localities situated on the margins of the global economy regain a momentum of visibility through geopolitical conflicts when BRI enter a sphere of interest of other global powers? Could a new visibility and set of geopolitics create alternatives to our existence, or it will uphold the extractivist capitalist logic done for so many years by Western European modernity? Following the BRI, this inquiry enters the space of ambiguity, similar to what the Southern Conceptualism Network addresses. Exposing practices to visibility, they gain more attraction that could be used and consumed in different ways. Glisson discusses the right to opacity as a right to resist being transparent by the gaze that constructs the other as an object. For Glisson, the right to opacity is not being available to be understood according to the Western logic. His opaque is not obscure. It is that which cannot be reduced. An opaque position for most of the partner cells seems to be an important position to take, especially given our present moment. We do not seek visibility that infrastructural projects of BRI provide. They are there, stable and visible, with their bridges, roads, railways, while we try to pertain our right to opacity through the proximity of working together, in the hope that this process can open new space through imagining differently. Giving the right to opacity and right to visibility as an active choice through the projects creates a delay of expectation to be visible and subsequently how that visibility is performed. That how is a tool for transformation. Larisse Frogier, director of Rockbund Art Museum and one of our partner cells, reflects. I strongly believe it is very precious and important to cultivate active strategies of invisibility today. By promoting extra visibility, we are either appropriated by the market or we go into a formatted way of thinking and curating. Invisibility is a huge paradox, especially when you are working within art in a museum to create exhibitions, to showcase artists, to display artworks, to promote art projects. But I truly believe that today, in society of extra surveillance, permanent self and political propaganda, overloaded mega art industries and markets, the most interesting artists and researchers today are the ones who are trying to dig deeper, escaping the surface of art and social media, exploring micro dimensions, creating conditions for new form of creating and experiencing art. For our project, Larisse says, I think it's very important to raise questions that can challenge the dominant discourse and institutions. Going step by step, learning deeper, not compromising, but also taking radical and decisive positions. Invisibility today is not to be inexistent, but in contrary, it is an act of choice, a practice, a strategy of resistance and opposition that allows other forms of actions and visibility. Interdependence. Our interdependence and the importance of moving beyond dualism has become more than evident since the pandemic began. Here, interdependence not only encompasses that between humans, but also includes non-human actors, such as animal, plants, lands, and water. Zdenka Badurinac, a partner cells of project, as a representative of Moderna Galerija, says, we need modes of working and instituting rooted in that very interdependence that is based on international solidarity. The idea of shared world can be built only on a different kind of internationalism, which includes international solidarity, by which I mean it respects the needs of individual groups and localities, their right to survival, to equal participation in global exchange of ideas and goods, their right to participate in the creation of commons. The commons means not only share natural resources, but also share social conditions for widespread participation in the formation of the world we share. She proposes the space where the notion of care is being performed that goes beyond curating objects and exhibitions, and transforms into a care that creates conditions that allow new relationships to emerge. Through 2020, we have been working with amazing and devoted architects, sociologists, artists, activists, anthropologists who are undertaking research, and through Symposium, in next 6 days, for the first time, you will hear them sharing their work. I would like to acknowledge that the first stage of the project has been supported by Foundation for Art Initiatives, Curtain Project, Rockbund Art Museum, Austrian Cultural Forum, Curatorial Practice, Monash University, Art Design and Architecture, and Australian Government Research Training Program Scholarship. During the last days of preparation for this symposium, I have been informed that our colleague Zdenka Badovinac has been tested positive for COVID-19. The test results came last Friday, 2 days ago. Originally, it has been planned that she will co-host today's session with me, but due to her health conditions, this will not be possible. I wish her a fast recovery, and I hope that she will be very soon with us together. Having her in the project, her amazing experience and knowledge in working together, establishing alliances, has been extremely important for me on this journey. Today, her colleague from Moderna Galerija is going to say a few words that Zdenka sent us. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Biljana. So, hello on behalf of Zdenka Badovinac and myself. In accordance with Zdenka's wish, here is her text. First of all, I would like to express my regret that I cannot address directly all of you who are having an online conference due to illness. When I invited me to the project As You Go, Roads Under Your Feet Towards the New Future, about almost 2 years ago, I immediately responded with curiosity and, of course, readiness to cooperate. Namely, what I have considered long time as a model for the future of curatorial and institutional practices is transnational, horizontal, and situated collaboration. And the As You Go is just such a project. At the moment when I started working together with Biljana, in Moderna Galerija, we had been already for some years involved in new confederation, La Internazionale, with a vision of transnational museum as an alternative to the dominant forms of inter-institutional collaboration. The As You is a transnational project of smaller dimensions, but its great importance lies in the fact that it serves as a transnational connection for those who work under economically, politically, or in some other way onerous conditions. The As You Go project brings together people from regions that in one way or another are affected by China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is sometimes called the Silk Road. The new Chinese colonialism influencing the economic and social transformation of these regions, often changing the traditional appearances of cities and affecting established ways of living and working. The As You Go relates not only to the present, but also to the past. A large part of the world along this road was once socialist. Here, I'm thinking of the once Soviet Republic, Central Asia, and the former Yugoslav countries. We should also note that economies of these countries were once more independent than they are today. The copper mines in Bor, Serbia, for example, were an important part of Yugoslavia's industrial sector, which underpinned the country's sovereignty. Today, however, the mines are under Chinese ownership. As You Go, it makes think about who shapes global dynamics today and allows comparisons with the past we shared. Former Yugoslav countries and Ethiopia were members of non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement is an alternative model of global collaboration. It used to be when it was easier for us to imagine the greater international influence and more active position of the small and marginalized. Today, on one hand, global capital completely dominates, and on the other hand, authoritative local regimes are growing, the space of freedom is narrowing. Let this conference be an inspiration for imagining other possibilities in difficult times. Thank you. And now let's hear from Biljana.
Due to pandemic, the past year made it very difficult to talk about it or even imagine the future. The future is uncertain, and our fear of crisis unfolding before us is present in every moment of our existence. The film Avra Amba Utopia follows the intentional community of individuals who choose to live together in harmony, embracing their differences and working for common good. When I spoke to film director Salem Korea about Avra Amba and the way of living together, we both shared the opinion that Avra Amba should be an example of how we should live in the future, starting to learn to be a different kind of human. It is the importance of everyday action that shapes our future and our pathways towards it. Screening of Avra Amba Utopia is also an attempt to actively learn from situated context we are engaged with, and we are inviting you to learn together with us from Avra Amba.
አውራ አምባ ማለት የማህበረሰቡ እሴት ከሌላው ለየት ያለ እሴት ስላለው በዚህ ነው የሚታወቀው። አውራ አምባ የሴቶችን እኩልነት፣ የህፃናት መብት፣ የወደቁ ሰዎችን ማገዝ፣ ከውሸት ከሌብነት ከነገረኝነት ነፃ ሆኖ ሙሉ የሰው ልጆች ክብር መሰጠት አለበት ከሚል ነው አውራ አምባ ያነሳሁት። ሰዎች ከሚሰሩት ነው ከሚያደርጉት መሰራት የሚገባው ነገር ቀርቶ መሰራት የማይገባው ነገር ሲሰራ ያየው ይህ ለምን ሰዎች በሰዎች ላይ በራሳቸው ሊፈልጉት የማይገባው ነገር በሰው ልጆች ላይ ለምን ያደርጋሉ እያልኩ ነው። ሰዎች ከሚሰሩት ነው የተማርኩት። የኔ ወላጆች ገበሬዎች ነበሩ። በእርሻ ስራ ላይ አብረው ይውላሉ። በጉልጉሎ፣ ባረሞ፣ ባጨዳው፣ በነዶ ሸክም እናቴ ከአባቴ ጋር አብራ ትውላለች። ማታ ላይ ሲመለሱ የአባቴ ስራ ዱር ነው፣ የእናቴ ስራ ከቤት ይቀጥላል። ድስቱ፣ ምጣዱ፣ እንጨት ማቅረቡ፣ ልጅ ማጫወቱ፣ እግር ማጠቡ የዱሩን እንዳገዘችው ሁሉ የቤቱን ስለምን አያግዛትም? ባይሆን እግሩን እንኳን አይታጠብላትም ለምን የሚል ጥያቄ ነው ማነሳው። የኔ እናትና አባት ብቻ መስሎ ይታየኛል። እያየው ስሄድ የሁሉም የሴቶችና የወንዶች አዳር አንድ አይነቱ ነው ያለው እና ለምን ነው? ሁለተኛው ህፃናቶችን በማይ ጊዜ እግረ ተከልቶኑ ጀምሮ አቅማቸውን ያላገናዘበ ስራ ሲሰጣቸው ያለው ያ ስራ ሲበላሽባቸው ሲጠፋባቸው አቅማቸው ግምት ውስጥ ሳይገባ ለምን አጠፋህ ለምን አበላሸህ የስሜት ማውጫ ዱላ ነው የሚሰጣቸው። ለምን ህይወት አይደሉም ወይ? አቅማቸውን ያላገናዘበ ስራ መሰጠቱ አላዱላው ለምን የሚል ነው። በአካባቢ ማህበረሰብ ሀሳቤን የሚረዳ ይሳታል። በሌላ ቦታ እየተዘዋወርኩ ሀሳቤን የሚረዳ ፍለጋ ያልኩኝ በ13 ዓመቴ እስቴ ተነስቼ ወደ ጎጃም፣ ተጎጃም ወደ ወሎ፣ ተወሎ ወደ ጎንደር እያልኩ ለ5 ዓመታት ወደ ወላጆቼ ሳልመለስ በዚያው ቆያለሁ። ሀሳቤን የሚረዳልኝ አላገኘሁም።
አድጀክቲቭ ጉድ፣ ቤተር፣ ቤስት ይሆናል።
እሺ ሌላ ጥያቄ ይህ የአውራምባ ማህበረሰብ ሲመሰረት መጀመሪያ ጊዜ ምንድን መቋቋሚያ ሀብት ነበረው? በምንድን ነው የተቋቋመው?
ገበሬዎች ነበር። ሞፈርና ቀንበሮቻችንን በሮቻችን ይዘን የተቋቋመው። ከዚያ ውጭ ካፒታል አላስፈልገንም። ካፒታሉን ከመሬት ስለምናገኝ ብዙዎቹ እብድ ነው የሚሉኝ። እብድ ነው ይላሉ። በእብደት መልክ ታማ ነው እያሉ በህፃንነቴ ታማ ነው እያሉ ብዙ ቁም ነገር አይሰጡኝም። አንዳንዶቹ ይጠይቁኛል። በጥያቄ በጣም ይገረማሉ። ከመገረም ውጭ የሚያደርጉት ነገር የለም።
ከለታት አንድ ቀን እንዲሁ ወደ ጎንደር አልፎ ሲሄድ እዚህ አካባቢ እኛን ወላጆች ያገኛቸዋል። ይሄን አስተሳሰብ ሲነግራቸው ሐሳብህ ጥሩ ነው ግን እንዴት ሊሄድ ይችላል ታስባለህ? ምክንያቱም ከወላጆቻችን ያገኘነው ባህል አለ። ሴት አገልጋይ እንድትሆን ነው ምናውቀው። እኛም ሚስቶቻችንን በዚህ አይነት ነው የኔም አባት ማለት ነው። ሌሎችም ሴት አገልጋይ እንድትሆን እንጂ አታቀም ብለን ነው እኛ የምናስበው። አንተ ደግሞ እኩል ናቸው ትላለህ። እንዴት ይሄ የመጣ ባህል ይቀረፋል ብለህ ታስባለህ? አንተ ደግሞ ውሸትም ይጥፋ፣ ነገረኝነትም ይጥፋ፣ ምቀኝነትም ይጥፋ ነው የምትለው። ውሸት ደግሞ የገበያ መሸጫ ነው የሚባለው። እንዴት ይሄ ይጠፋል ብለህ ታስባለህ? ጸብ ይጥፋ ትላለህ። ጸብ አብረን የተፈጠረ ነው ብለን ነው እንግዲህ የምናስበውና ይሄ ባህል እውነት ይለቃ ብለህ ታስባለህ ወይ? አንተ ጸብና አስወግደህ ምድራዊ ገነትን እንፍጠር ነው የምትለው። ምድራዊ ገነትንስ መፍጠር እንዴት ይቻላል የሚል ጥያቄ ነበረኛ ወላጆች የሚያነሱለት።
ይሄንን ስንመሰረት የአካባቢው ህዝብ አልዋጥለት ብሎ ሐሳቡን አልገድፈው በማለት በጣም በብዙ ስቃይ አግኝቶናል። እያደሙብን እናጥፋቸው እየተባለ መጀመሪያ እሱን እናጥፋው እሱ ተጣፋ ይበተናሉ የሚለው ሁላ ያው በመንግስት ጥንካሬነት ነው እንጂ አካባቢው እዛ ጊዜ አላመነበትም። ብዙ አላመነበትም። አይደማ በጣም ቆንጆ ነው። አሁንማ እኮ ይኸው እንደምታውቁት በመጤሃትም በተጅለበጅንም በሁሉም ተላልፏል። አገር ዓለም መንግስት አውቆናል። እና ዛሬ ይኸው መብራት ተይህ አለ፣ ይኸው ወፍጮ ተይህ አለ፣ ሱቅ ተይህ አለ። እህሉን አመጣው ይሄ ነው የሚያቃኑ ገበያው ይሄ ነው። አዲጃፋቸው ነው እንደ ልባችን ሆነናል። ቆርቆሮ ይሄ ነው፣ ሚስማር ይሄ ነው፣ ሁሉ ተሟልቶ ያገኙት ስለሆነ በጣም ደስተኛ ናቸው። አንዳንዶቹ ፊት ሲያጣቁሩ የነበሩት እንዲህ ያሉትን ሰዎች ነው ወይ ያላሰራቸው ለካ እንዲያው በተወሰኑ ሰዎች እየተነሳነ እየሰማነ ታሪካቸውን ስናጠፋ የነበርን ለካ ተሳስተናል የሚሉ ናቸው ብዙዎች።
በውሃ ችግር በጣም ችግር ላይ ስንሆን በእጃችን ነው በ90 ዓመተ ምህረት የቆፈርነው 14 ሜትር ነው ርቀቱ። ወደ ግንቦት ወደ ሚያዝያ ምንም ውሃ ይጠፋል ይህች ጉድጓዱ ማለት። ከዚያ የግድ ወደ ምንጭ ነው የምንሄደው። ወደ 2 ኪሎ ሜትር ይሆናል በግምት። አሁን አካባቢያችን አረንጓዴ ቱሪስት ቦታ ነው። አረንጓዴ ማድረግ ሲቻል አልተቻለም ውሃ ስለሌለ መጠጡ ራሱ ይኸው ችግር ነው። የውሃ ችግር በጣም ችግር ነው።
መጀመሪያ ገበሬዎች ነበርን። በደርግ ጊዜ የወያኔ አባል ናቸው ተብለን በ80 ዓመተ ምህረት በተሰደርንበት ጊዜ ተሰደን ቆይተን በ85 እና በ86 ዙረን ስንመጣ ሰላም አግኝተን ስንመጣ እርሻችን መሬታችን በገበሬው እጅ ተይዟል። መንግስትን አስለቅቁና ስጡን ስንል መስጠት አልቻሉም። ከዚያ መሬት ባይገኝም ከመሬት ላይ ብቻ የተንጠለጠለ ህይወት አይደለም። ከሰራን ወደ ኢንዱስትሪው ሰርተን ማደር እንችላለን ስንል የግድ በማናውቀው ሙያ ገብተን ወደ ኢንዱስትሪው ገብተን የአልባሳት ስራና ወደ ንግዱ ገብተን ያለነው አሁን ላይ።
ሽመና ስራ ስንገባ በባህላዊ ሽመና ነው። ሴቶችም ወንዶችም ገብተን ስገባን ሰራን። እሱን እየሰራን እያለን ጥቃቅን አነስተኛ ኢንዱስትሪ ማለት ነው። እነሱ እንደዚህ ለጉብኝት ሲመጡ እኛንን እየሰራን ሲያገኙን እኒህ ሰዎች የተሻለ ስልጠና ብንሰጣቸው ለራሳቸው ቆርጦ ለሌላው ሞዴል የሚሆኑበት ነገር አለ ሲሉ ከዚያ ስልጠና ሰጡን። እንደዛ እያልን አሳለፍን። ኋላ መጨረሻ ላይ የውሎ አበሉ ተሰጠን፣ ተወያየን። የውሎ አበሉ ተሰጠን ወስደን አሁን ይሄንን በላን። ሳምንት 15 ቀን ሊያበላል ይችላል፣ ግን ዘለቄታው ምንድነው? ይሄንን አሁን መከፋፈል የለብንም፣ አሁን መውሰድ የለብንም። አሁንም ይሄን ሽመና ማስቀጠል አለብን። እንዴት አድርገን ማሽኑን አሁን ዙምራ እኔ ጠርቤ ገጥማለሁ፣ ሰውየው ይዞ ሳይሄድ ሪድ ነው የማይገኘው፣ ሪዱን ደግሞ እሱን ለምነዋለሁ። ስለዚህ አሁንም ጥሬ ዕቃ ማምጫ አድርገን ማህበራችንን ማቋቋም ነው ያለብን እንጂ ይሄን ተከፋፍለን ብንወስደው ምንም ትርጉም እንደሌለው ተወያየን። ያችን የጥሬ ዕቃ ማምጫ አረግን፣ ዙምራ ገጠመ። በመጥረቢያ ነው እንግዲህ በማሽን ነው፣ በመጥረቢያ ጠርቦ ገጠመው። በአመት 50 ብር እንካፈል ነበር በማህበሩ፣ በአመት 50 ብር ማለት ነው። ከዛ ያደገች ወደ 70 ወደ 100 እያለ እያደገ ማህበራችንን እያደገ አሁን ዛሬ በአሁኑ ሰዓት አሁን ክፍፍል ስናደርግ እያንዳንዱ አሁን የባለፈው 6,000 ተካፈለ። ለኔ 6 ለዙምራ 6 ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ 12,000 ማለት ነው። እንግዲህ ከዛች ከ50 ብር ተነስተን ማለት ነው። አሁን ደግሞ ይሄ ሽመና በጣም አስቸጋሪ ነው። እንግዲህ ከ94 ጀምሮ ለስንት አመታት ነው አሁን ይዘነው ያለነው። ሰው እየተቸነፈ ሄደ። በቃ ሌላ ስራ የለንም፣ ይሄው ብቻ ነው። ሰው እየደከመው በጣም ኩላሊት በሽተኛ እየሆነ ጨጓራ በሽተኛ እየሆነ በጣም በአሁኑ ሰዓት በተለይ ኩላሊት ላይ አልተቻለም። ይሄ በመሆኑ አሁን ህዝቡ አሁን ስራው አቁሟል ማለት ይቻላል። ምን እናርግ? ዝም ብለን ማየት የለብንም። ራዕያችን ሰፊ ነው፣ በጣም ሰፊ ነው። በጣም ብዙ ነገሮች አስቀምጠናል። በአንድ ጊዜ ላንደርስበት እንችላለን፣ ግን እንዲሁ የተቀመጠውን እቅድ ደረጃ በደረጃ ቀስ ቀስ እያልን መሄድ አለብን። ስለ አውራምባ ሲነሳ እንጀራ ይጋግራል፣ ወንዱ ሴቷ ታርሳለች ነው። በላይ ነው ዝም ብሎ የሚወራው። ይሄ ሳይሆን ማህበረሰቡ ዘንድ ምን ነገር አለ? ሚስጥሩ መታወቅ አለበት። እንዴት ነው እየኖሩ ያሉት? ዋናውስ የሚያስፈልገው ምንድነው? ይሄ ስራው መገለጫው ሊሆን ይችላል። የሐሳብነት እኩልነቱ አለለ፣ ፍቅሩ አለለ፣ መተሳሰቡ ከሌለ ስራው ይሰራል በል
ደህናው ልጅ ትናንትና ቢመጣ ታይተሽ ምሳ ሁና ገና ናችሁ እንዴ? ነው በልታችሁ ገና ናችሁ? አላመጣይም ገና። ስንት ሰዓት ነው የምትበሉት? ስንት ሰዓት ነው የምትበሉት? ታውቁታለች? 6 ሰዓት 7 ሰዓት 7 ሰዓት 7 ሰዓት
ስለሚንቀሳቀስ ሲጠብቅ ይውላል። ተራራው ባህር ዛፉን የሌላው ማህበረሰብ ከፍ እየመጣ እንዳይበላ
መማሬም አለመማሬም ምንም አይደለም ለኔ። መማር ጥሩ እንደሆነ አውቃለሁ። ግን የተማሩ ሰዎችን የሚሰሩትን ሳይ ሰውን ማዳን አልተቻለም። መማሩስ ምን ትርጉም አለው የሚያሰኘኝ አንዱ ያ ነው። ሰው ወልቆ ሰው አልፎት ከሄደ መማሩስ ምንድነው? ለማን ነው የምንማረው? ለምኑ ነው የሚለው ለነገሩ እኔ ትምህርት የሚጠይቅ ስራ አይደለም እየሰራሁ ያለሁት። ትምህርት የሚጠይቅ ስራም አይደለም። በአይን የማያቸው ብልሽቶች ናቸው። ደስታን የማያሉ፣ ጥሩ ነገር የማያሉ፣ መጥፎን የማያሉ። ተመጥፎ ወደ ደህናው መውሰድ ደግሞ ጥሩ እንደሆነ ይገባኛል። አንዳንድ ጊዜ ብቻ ግን ይቆጨኛል ቋንቋ ባለማወቅ። ቋንቋ ባውቅ ኑሮ ይህን ሀሳቤን በአንደበቴ ገልጥ ነበር። ባለመማር ይህን መግለጥ አቅቶኝ። ኢትዮጵያ በተፈጥሮዋ ዳቦ ናት። ስራ ብንጨምርባት የበለጠ ዳቦ ትሆን ነበር። ኢትዮጵያ ላይ ተምረን የኢትዮጵያ ዳቦ ያንሰናል ስላልሰራንበት ማለት ነው። ግን እያለ ጥሩ ሀገር እያለችን ሰርተን ዳቦዋን ከፍ እናድርግ ማለት ሲገባል ወደ ሀገር ሰርተው ያሳደጉት ዳቦ አለ። ከዚያ ዳቦ መሄድ ያምረናል። እኔም ብማር ጥያት ሀገር የነህር ነበር ይላሉ። ብማር ኑሮ ሀገርን ጥያት ነበር ማለት ነው።
እቅዳችን ትልቅ ነው። ዝም ብለን ማየት የለብንም። እኛም ማንሻገራቸው እንድልይ ወንድሞቻችን እህቶቻችንንም እየጠየቅን የሚቀረፈው ችግር እየተቀረፈ መቀጠል አለብን እንጂ ዝም ብለን እንዲህ ብለን ተቀምጠን ሰው በህራብና በችግር ከሆነ ላይቀጥል ነው ማለት ነው። ኢኮኖሚው መቀየር አለበት። አስተሳሰቡ ጥሩ አስተሳሰብ አለው ደግሞ በኢኮኖሚው ተለውጦ ለልጆቻችንም ነገ የምናስረክበውና እንዲቀጥሉት ማድረግ ነው ያለብን።
Today we will have two presentations, one by Maria Glavaš and the other by Robel Temesgen. Please, during these presentations, type in your questions in the Facebook so we will have a chance at the end of the day to reply to these questions. And today I'm really proud to present our younger researcher within the As You Go project, Maria Glavaš. Maria Glavaš is a student of culturology at the University of Social Science in Ljubljana. She has done a groundbreaking research looking at cultural exchange between China and the Balkan countries. When we talk about Belt and Road Initiative, we usually talk about infrastructure, but there is very little research that is addressing cultural exchange under this umbrella. Over the last year, Maria has been collecting data from over 10 countries within the Balkan region, contacting over 30 institutions, art museums, national galleries, art centers, trying to understand what kind of cultural exchange is taking place. Maria will tell you more about it. Maria, welcome.
Hello, so can you hear me? You probably can. Thanks for the introduction and greetings to everyone, sadly still just through a computer screen. So I'm currently residing in my student dorm, which is also where I am right now. And as much as I do not want to give any more space to the coronavirus, I think I still must preface this presentation by saying that the pandemic had great impact both on me personally and my research. So generally, I consider myself an optimist, especially when thinking the future. And as I joined this project, which was in the summer of 2020, when we regained some sense of normality, since there was no curfew in place, the bars were open, travel was opening up, I really didn't think back then that the virus would have much impact on my work. But right now, everything is super stressful. Just being in this dorm is illegal because the government has closed our student dorms. So just by being in my room, which I legally rent and pay bills for, I am breaking the law. This week we are also celebrating 150 days of curfew at 9 in the evening, which has also had its toll on me since I'm both a student and a worker. So I work and study most days, and in the evening when I'm free, I can't even go out. Also, our schools and colleges remain closed, and I haven't seen the inside of my faculty for a good year now. And also, if you just look at my toolkit, you will see videos of Ljubljana during curfew and of the bicycle protests, which has been our reality here in Slovenia for the last year. There have been anti-government protests basically weekly since February of last year. And considering that my work is also centered around cultural landscapes being built and changed by the BRI here in the Balkan region, my research also got slowed down by radical political changes happening here in Slovenia, which are very hard to ignore when thinking about future cultural landscapes. So in my first contribution, I decided to think about these changes happening here, both sort of for my personal relief and also more importantly, just to demonstrate the dangers of closing up to the world and also dictating cultural landscapes which fit a very narrow narrative that only suits a very strict political agenda. I think this is also especially fitting since Moderna Galerija, where we were supposed to be today, has also fallen victim to these changes. So in today's presentation, I will firstly present my research, which was gathering raw data about cultural exchanges happening between China and countries in the Balkan region. Then I will present some thoughts about these exhibitions and projects, which is something I'm still working on, so it will be just some initial thoughts. And then I would like to open up a debate about, on one hand, ambitions and potentials that we can see in these cultural collaborations under the BRI, and then also about the other side of the coin, which is the dangers of closing up and shifting towards more classical national narratives on the example of Slovenia, and also, of course, Slovenia's future in the BRI. So as I started this project, I had very little knowledge about the BRI. Like most people here in the Balkan region, I have heard a lot about Chinese investments here, but mostly just in the infrastructural sphere. But the BRI, however, is a bigger project that goes beyond mere economical cooperation. It is supposed to bring countries along the historical Silk Road closer together, which of course also entails cultural bonding. However, I quickly realized that there wasn't much information out there about these parts of the BRI, so my first step was to just gather raw data about any cultural exchanges, focusing mainly on artistic exchanges, and to somehow present these in a systematic way, which could then be used for any future research. So my main goals were, on one hand, just identifying any such events, and then also interpreting the content of them, which is still a work in progress. So to begin, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I wrote a questionnaire which was sent out to different art institutions throughout the Balkan region. The questionnaire consisted of very basic questions about the presence of such exchanges, about the reasoning behind them, also about the absence of such projects and the reason for the absence. And of course, I kindly asked them to provide me with any information about any specific exhibitions that were happening. This questionnaire was sent out to 36 institutions all throughout the Balkan region. They were both state-owned and also private institutions like museums, galleries, centers, cultural centers, and so on. And of those 36, 20 have replied. Additionally, I have also manually searched the internet for any such activities. Following this, I started documenting all available data that was brought to my attention. And in this stage, I encountered several problems. Firstly, I did not receive responses from all institutions, which was to be expected, of course, but most notably, I received none from privately owned galleries. This could be due to many reasons, like the ongoing pandemic has obviously shut down a lot of these places. And also, as I later came to notice, most of these exchanges were primarily happening through state-owned institutions. The second problem I encountered was that for many of these events and exchanges, I was only provided with rather sparse data. And thirdly, I was unable to gather any data on audience reception. So this last problem was the most difficult to me because I was very interested in examining how local audiences perceive not only directly the Chinese art that was being exhibited, but also in a broader sense, the cultural interweaving of China within these regions. In the future, it would be very interesting to focus further on that aspect. I think the problem was that I was addressing institutions, not the audiences themselves. So of course I couldn't get this data. But while the West seems to be very suspicious of China being or becoming a global superpower, the Balkan region, which is heavily influenced both by the West and the East, doesn't seem to have such a narrow perception. So you have people who engage a lot with conspiratorial thoughts, but you also have a lot of people who are very welcoming of this. So after finishing gathering this data, we decided it would be best to present it visually on a map. If you could go to the next slide, thank you. And this map shows both local activities here in the Balkan region, as well as connecting activities back to or in China. The events noted on the map are also briefly described on the webpage and accompanied by images from the exhibitions. There's also ambition to keep this map alive and continuously growing as these events continue. And we were also discussing adding other participating regions, such as South Asia, for example. So at this stage, what I noticed mostly that caught my eyes was just how these exhibitions were described in the articles I was reading about them. More than about the art itself, they all talked about the connectivity of these events, about how they are supposed to bring participating countries closer together, also in a sense of local publics learning more about other cultures, becoming familiar with them, learning to appreciate them, and so on. So it appeared to be a very warm and friendly approach to intercultural interweaving. And this is where I also see most positive potential in the BRI. And I think this was also very nicely illustrated in the introduction music video we showed today, because it was really this very friendly approach, you know. As we know, the last couple of decades are decades of globalization. We live in times where we are connected more than ever, both through physical means of transport and through the means of the internet and just in general mass media. Yet mostly any crisis, no matter how small, you know, this could be just a football game on one side, but on the other side also huge political and economic crises like the refugee crisis or the 2008 recession. And all these crises, they never fail to bring out the good old national identities, which time and time again prove to be some of the strongest identities out there. And a lot of attempts to overcome this and to build broader, more inclusive identities that would bring us closer instead of dividing us fail. If we, for instance, look at the European Union, which is, or better said, was supposed to be this huge integration project, started failing badly once the recession of 2008 hit. Suddenly, Euroscepticism became the norm, and as we know today, is still a huge issue in Europe, and we are being more divided based on national interest day by day. And these national interests are, of course, being enforced also on the individual level through constructing national identities, which vary of outsiders. So even if these projects under the BRI hold great potential, we still have to analyze what is really happening to grasp both the good side and the bad side to see what we can improve in these attempts, which in my opinion are in our world as of right now very necessary. So improvement in the sphere of intercultural bonding needs to be considered if we don't always want to make, you know, one step forward and then two steps back. So for this purpose, a textual analysis of these projects that I have documented is needed to fully grasp how much potential they are really living up to. Because of the fact, though, that I am a student and also a worker, the last 2 months for me were mostly just studying for exams, and I haven't come to do a full textual analysis of at least some of the artworks presented in these exhibitions yet. However, we did have a workshop with our colleagues from the Rockbund Art Museum who have shared some thoughts on these artworks with me. So I will just very briefly present my initial thoughts on it. So what strikes me the most with a lot of these exhibitions is that they appear to be very classical, even historical. So for instance, if we go to the next slide, and thank you. Yeah, and we see these lantern festivals. And these lantern festivals, at least to me, from what I've gathered, appear to be some of the most popular events here in the West, in Europe, and also in the United States. Usually they set them up like a theme park, you know, and they automatically, because of that, invite much bigger audiences than just these classical exhibitions and galleries and museums, because they also invite many people that normally wouldn't step into a gallery or a museum. So these lantern festivals are a modern approach to the classical Chinese lantern festivals, and the lanterns are made using rather modern techniques, but what they are presenting is still very historical, very classical. So we have a lot of ancient symbolism, historical mythological motives, right? And if we go to the next slide, this was also an exhibition which is supposedly was a contemporary exhibition, but for me, and let me just say this, I am a layman in Chinese art. I do not have an eye for this, but when I first look at these images, it really does not strike me that much as contemporary. We still see a lot of traditional motifs, and also the technique that is ink painting is also traditional. And in a lot of these exhibitions, we can see a lot of focus on these traditional techniques and a lot of focus on traditional motifs, right? So now if we go to the last example, the next slide, thank you. This was an exhibition that was not part of the BRI, but we can see that there is obviously also art being made that doesn't really fit this traditional frame that much. More modern techniques being used and modern motifs being used. So art, besides being a tool of expression for the individual, greatly impacts cultures and societies. It is continuously shaping our present realities and future realities, while also shaping our understanding of the past. We learn about past societies, at least partially, through the art which was present at the time. So future generations will also learn about us through the art that we make and share today. So it is also impacting the present by directly shaping our cultural landscapes. And through shaping these landscapes, it is also dictating future possibilities. So the question arises, how am I supposed to know a culture, its past and present? And how am I supposed to think the future when some, half, or even most of it is hidden away from me? I would just like to point out that I am not talking here about political art, and we need to make a distinction between political art and art in the service of politics. It just so happens coincidentally that the last example I showed contains political art, but what I want to talk about is art in the service of politics, since the BRI is a political project, right? So art under the BRI is art in the service of politics. And our cultural landscapes are not only constructed freely through art which is being made, but also through cultural policies and curating, because those limit and prescribe the protocols under which art can shape the future and how the past and present can be understood. So while it isn't necessarily bad that most of these exhibitions that I have documented contain art that is centered around traditional motifs and traditional techniques, since history is obviously also necessary to fully understand the culture, but they do appear to be very restrictive in a sense of not giving any space to contemporary forms of expression or contemporary identities. So intercultural collaborations within this sphere have a great potential to move away from classical national narratives, which too often look for an enemy within or outside as a common denominator, consequently weaponizing audiences against this predetermined opposition. Whether these intercultural collaborations live up to this great potential is, however, subject to debate, and if they are even possible, always remains in the hands of individual governments and private bureaucracies who choose if, how, and when they will collaborate. So art has often been used as a tool to strengthen national identities and has been greatly impacted by the infamous other, the enemy. So now I would like to talk a little bit about the recent changes I mentioned here in Slovenia, which have occupied my mind in the past couple of months. So since the BRI projects are mostly funded and held by state institutions, I will focus on this particular domain. And I have to preface this by saying that all curating is some form of narrating and mediating meanings. So I am not trying to idealize the recent past here. But in Slovenia, state-owned art institutions enjoyed relative autonomy until recently, albeit insufficient financial support, particularly in specific fields, was always a big problem. But aside from this nepotism in funding, there was not much state intervention into the artists and curators themselves. However, this drastically began to change since the undemocratic rise of the 14th government of independent Slovenia, right before the pandemic of 2020. So let me just explain why I say undemocratic. basically before this we had a minority government that was struggling a lot, and it fell apart just before the pandemic of 2020. In those elections, which are now 3 years ago almost, I think, our current prime minister's party won, but they didn't have enough support in other parties to actually form a coalition. This is why we had a minority government. And as the past government fell, two parties, those are DESUS and SMC, those are two parties that before the election, their campaigns were very heavily based on the fact that they would not go into a coalition with our current prime minister. And once the past government has fallen, they did join that coalition, and they made it possible that our current prime minister basically started leading the government. So this is why we consider it an undemocratic government. And also, as I have already mentioned, the protests. The first protest was held actually before the pandemic in February, and it was a protest against the coalition of hate, because a lot of us consider them the coalition of hate because they are very extreme, right-wing, populist, and so on. So this government is now using tactics that are best known for Poland, Hungary, and Russia. They are verbally attacking media outlets, research institutions, and museums. They're cutting their funding, and they're replacing leadership roles in shady ways. So just yesterday, I came across a fun fact that in this year, because they are holding the government now for almost exactly a year, they have changed 1,500 personnel choices, right? So that adds up to about 130 each month. This is not just my opinion. This is a very clear political agenda, and academics who specialize in the fields of Central and Southeast Europe pointed out in an open letter to our current Prime Minister Janez Janša in 2020, and I quote, that the frequency of such interventions and the many clear signals that more are to come further prove that these are not normal personal decisions, but rather the first steps in an attempt to curtail the independence of scholars and to place narratives about the past under government control. This becomes even more evident when we look at which institutions are being attacked. For instance, the National Museum of Contemporary History, which holds a permanent exhibition of Slovenia in the 20th century, directly addressing our past as a member state of former Yugoslavia and our gain of independence. Also, the National Gallery and Modern Gallery, both some of the most prominent and well-known art institutions in Slovenia. In addition, the government is planning to open a research institute of Venetic theory, and this theory suggests that the origins of Slovenians do not begin with Slav settlements here, but rather reach back to ancient times. And this theory is widely considered to be false and has been rejected by most scholars. Our Prime Minister, however, holds yearly meetings for supporters of this theory, and when considering how they like to rewrite our history, it should also raise alarms that they are planning, or now it's already active plans, to open the Museum of Independence of Slovenia. Also, the Venetic theory is mostly used by neo-Nazis. So the current enemy threat being constructed is our history as a member state of Yugoslavia, especially the Yugo-nostalgia. Many people still feel non-Catholic nations, and anyone who lies left to the government on the political compass. Clearly, these are attempts to not only shift the cultural sphere towards a more patriotic and nationalistic narrative, but a narrative that is directly in support of our current Prime Minister, his role in the battle for independence, and his personal beliefs. I would like to argue that these current changes within the cultural arts spheres in Slovenia are what could be considered some of the worst approaches possible. Art in this scenario is not used for mobilizing in a romantic sense or enabling a peaceful coexistence of identities, as we can see in the BRI projects, but rather is being used to annihilate some identities and to push others forward. In the context of intercultural interweaving, this could mean a step backwards, since focusing on enemies and weaponizing audiences does not leave much space for a friendly coexistence of identities. In terms of the BRI, we are yet to see where this will place Slovenia, but our Prime Minister has, in very Trump fashion, began engaging in several conspiracy theories about China, whether it is about the coronavirus or whether it is about the supposed political interference of China with his opposition here in Slovenia. At a fundamental political level, this paranoia doesn't bring much optimism in relation to the potential of future cultural interweaving and exchanges. Even the connections between Slovenia and Hungary, which our current government considers of utmost importance, are only happening directly through military action and mutual support of hate-driven local news media. Slovenia is also closing up to Europe and building under a rather Eurosceptic identity right now. On the other hand, the BRI greatly emphasizes a peaceful coexistence of identities. From what I have gathered in the first phase of my research, it appears that these exchanges are an effort to bring cultures closer together through mutual and empathic understanding, which, as I said, has been overtly stated on most of the observed exhibitions. This understanding is being created through an exchange of artifacts, meanings, technical knowledge, and human resources. So in conclusion, intercultural interweaving has a great potential of shifting away from classical national narratives that forge bonds as a response to the presence of a threat. National identity itself is constructed through these mechanisms of searching for a common enemy, so a greater understanding and knowledge of different cultures is needed to look beyond this. Participating countries have already agreed to these processes of interweaving, but as politics and culture remain ever-changing, the consideration of current cultural policies and their changes are always necessary. And when considering that curate is to narrate, another analysis will be needed to better fully understand exactly what narratives are being told and how much positive potential they actually hold. In the future, I will attempt to do such an analysis of these exhibitions presented on the map, and this will, I hope, allow for a deeper discourse and engagement on whether these projects are living up to their full potential of being used as a force of cultural harmony rather than separation. So this is it from me. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robel Temesgen, artist and educator based in Addis Ababa. Robel and his action throughout the last year in the peak of the pandemic made me think a lot. Every day, turning on my computer, I have been hoping to read about different ways of engaging with the situations and ways of caring, but my expectation regarding these different modes of working till today stay unfulfilled. Until one day last year I spoke to Robel Temesgen, and he told me that he bought a sewing machine and he started sewing masks for the community in Addis. He would distribute these masks for free to the ones who need them or the ones who cannot afford to buy them. In 2019, Robel Temesgen has joined the project As You Go as an artist, but also as a partner cell. He developed the project, the Addis newspaper, China issue 2050, and he will be sharing his insights about the project. Robel, welcome. Robel, welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm so glad to be here. So nice to be able to join you wherever you are at. I'm actually situated at my own living room in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia. And short story before we all begin here. I had to drive early in the morning to my office, but a huge transformer has fallen down yesterday. So since then, we don't have electricity at my office. I had to come back, drive some 45 minutes back to my home to join you. I'm glad to make it in time. So when I was starting to research to produce the Ethio-Chinese issue of my newspaper, it was not easy to kind of comprehend the information or to kind of squeeze it down into my newspaper, because the first thing was that as much as China is bold and visible in Ethiopia through, clothings, outfits, through, small things like earring or hair bands, all the way to, mega structures like construction of dam, construction of roads, and huge size of hotels, imports, and so on. The research material that you would find on the ground, let's say, be it online or physically, is like super limited. I remember I tried to go to National Library, the National Archive in Ethiopia, to try to find a bit of documents and maybe even publications that I could find. And just like the American Center, there is also a corner for China where Chinese governments have kind of contributed a bit of support for the space to be renovated and to kind of put a bit of documents. But it was, as you could imagine, it was more a little bit of literature, some Chinese language publications, nothing more. And again, I went to the official website for Embassy of China in Ethiopia, and at the same time, Embassy of Ethiopia in China. Both websites, as content concerned, they were quite empty, beyond news and sort of announcements of like what's happening, in terms of Ethiopia and China relationships, and one of the reasons I believe was also for my interest to be part of this project, the As You Go project, upon the invitation by Biljana, was to be able to navigate through the bold enough, the visible enough phenomena of Chinese presence in Ethiopia, but the not so much talking about. We've got, like, in a local context, everyone have got something to say about it, or they, everyone have noticed it. You can't really unnotice it. But then there is no cultural reflection to it. There is no critical reflection to it, at least to my knowledge. Of course, there would be definitely some research that has been, undertaken and so on, but it hasn't been to the attention of the mass that the phenomena, the huge connection between Ethiopia and China, let's say the influence between the two nations, specifically the Chinese influence towards the Ethiopian when it comes to politics and soft power again comes into the image here, but politics particularly, but also trade in general, hasn't been a much talked, a much debated, much available information when I was searching for it. And that was the interesting aspect, because it's the opposite. The visibility is the opposite. So if you look into a small nation from Europe who has less influence on the physical sense of it in Ethiopia, they would still have a bold presence when you go to Google them on their cultural relationships, political engagements, debates, and so on. So this was an interesting aspect, but again, also a little bit of a challenge to comprehend all the information that's on the ground towards to my newspaper project. So that was mainly the reason that I kind of chose to flip into a futuristic newspaper rather than an actual newspaper that's like taking place now and here moment. And well, in a way, it was also rewarding to flip it into a futuristic newspaper, because then it was also enabling not only to imagine, but also to fabricate again, which is a duplication of what's going on globally when it comes to information and news, to fabricate content, to be able to forge things that hasn't happened, well, yet at least, as assumed to be as already happened events to be covered on the newspaper. So I guess, challenge was converted into a potential and possibility on this context. And yeah, super nice to be able to be joining you to be able to also talk about my project. Thank you, Biljana, for the invitation, not only on this symposium, but also to the As You Go project as a partner cell, along with wonderful colleagues whom I get to know, well, I start to get to know slowly more and more through time. I'm very glad to be able to join. And for those of you who doesn't know, I am joining this project, the As You Go project, on the capacity of one specific project that I've been doing since 2014. It's a newspaper project that I started when I was abroad studying. Back in that time, well, initially information was a problem. Information meaning that access to information about Ethiopia while even being in Ethiopia or abroad has been a problem around that time, and which has continued, of course, for many level of reasons. But yeah, that was the main reason that I started this project, and on that capacity, I was invited to be part of this project through that particular project of writing a newspaper using my hand and ink and so on. For this presentation, I'm actually going to start by reading you a little bit of a command, which is a text that I developed, well, under construction text, I have to say, that I have developed a year and a half, 2 years ago. As the project was evolving, it was some sort of necessity that I saw within the project to kind of open up a little bit for collaborations, for potential, cooperations, and specifically in this time of our engagements, where to use Zoom and Skype becoming more and more the situation. I thought about opening up a little bit of the project to expand it into other people using the same modality if necessary to produce similar material with different context and different content. Addis newspaper, the command. A newspaper is Addis newspaper. Addis newspaper is a newspaper. A newspaper must be written with hand. A newspaper must be written in a language that comforts the writer. A newspaper must take time. A newspaper must take time. A newspaper must be physical. A newspaper must be laborious. A newspaper must be boring. A newspaper must be exciting. A newspaper should be a boredom encounter to news. A newspaper must have news. A newspaper must be alternative news. A newspaper is news that is time sensitive. A newspaper is time that transcends between the present, the future, and the past. A newspaper must be timeless. A newspaper should be a low-cost, non-archival paper that is an off-white shade with a distinctive feel. A newspaper should be written using a table, a chair, ink, and a paper. A newspaper must have black and red ink on it. A newspaper must have a front page with headlines. A newspaper must have an editorial, news, health, politics, and arts blog. A newspaper should have a sport blog at the end back. A newspaper should be no less than 24 pages or not. It has to be a 28 centimeter by 35.5 centimeter page with a margin of 1.5 centimeter or not. A newspaper has to have a distinctive font. A newspaper should have a typeface that is linked to a resistance publication of a locality, your locality. To write is to use hand, or a prosthetic hand, an ink and a paper. To write is to ink and inscribe. To write is to know what and how to write, or not. But essentially, to write is to understand what's put on the newspaper. To write is to protest. To write is to exhaust. To write is to understand. To write is to antagonize. To write is to archive. To write is to give due credit. To write is to finish. To write is to engage, to gaze through the imagery. To write is to remember. To write on a non-archival paper is to forget. To write is to remember, to forget. So, yeah, I guess I will have to take you through a couple of projects, newspaper projects, in order for you to be able to understand a little bit more on the process and the initial idea of why to make a newspaper and how to make it. The initial point of making the newspaper was to be able to write, but somehow to be able to write only to keep it to yourself in a way, or to be able to write and to only share it intimately with few other people who would visit my studio or some small scale exhibitions. In that case, what I started writing was to be able to collect contents from social media, because Facebook, specifically back in 2014 and 15, was the major medium that I have had an opportunity to access news. And yet all those newses are not exactly a news that's accurate. There are news coming from local places from Ethiopia, news coming from abroad like Europe and Northern America. And whenever they're being filtered through independent private medias or individuals, then there comes the issue of orchestrating, fabricating a news that is not accurate enough on when you look into what's going on locally. So it makes me thinking about what to believe, which one to believe, and how to kind of negotiate a credible source and non-credible source. And in that case, I ended up with producing a news that falls between those two, basically. To mention a few, what I did was that, using ambiguity as the center of the content, the format of the writing, and ambiguity as in whether it was a, let's say pro-government outlet or somewhat protesting format. In one case, what has been the headline was on my newspaper. It talks about congratulating the Ethiopian government for winning 100% of the election, while also congratulating the newlyweds in Ethiopia. So somehow, the headline was more or less focusing on the newlywed, the bride and the groom, to be congratulated by the newspaper company. But when you go to details, it talks about rather the Ethiopian, leading party who claimed by the time to have won 100% of the election. This kind of sarcasms were the initial points, where it was also important for the newspaper by then, when I produced it, to have used somewhat a time-traveling kind of content, where you would get a content, assumed to be fresh. Let's say the death, a passing of one prominent figure in Ethiopia who passed away some 50 years ago, could still be, an active news while producing it in 2014, and so on and so forth. Well, while I'm talking, electricity again went off, but I'm using my cellular data, so we're safe. This is my side note to you all. But as time progresses, my newspaper format, my content has also developed and evolved into something I think have become more and more focused. Since 2017, 18, and 19, I also keep producing more and more contents, issues of the newspaper. One would be a prime minister issue that I produced in 2019. 2018 is it? And then I produced another newspaper that talks about explicitly a particular square in Ethiopia, one prominent square in Addis Ababa called Meskel Square. So there is an issue that focuses and dedicates entire content about the square and its political and social role within Ethiopian politics. So, every blog, every aspect of the newspaper were entirely focused on what has happened to the place, what has happened on the place, and what has happened, in Ethiopian politics through that location. So, the entire research was focused on since the inception of the sport all the way to the present, which is 2018. The newspaper that was also talking about the prime minister, the new prime minister of Ethiopia, the current prime minister of Ethiopia. I felt the urge for covering the first 6 months of his time when he took power. And the reason was actually not only to have, a certain period of time to be captured by the newspaper, but that time was quite important in Ethiopian politics, in the contemporary Ethiopian politics, where, every single hour, if I'm not exaggerating, was an hour of breaking news, where, the new ministerial cabinet would be formed, a new legislation or a new kind of rule would come out to shut down a prison. And one prisoner would get freed and another would get freed the other day, and so on. So it was like super paced, and the diaspora, the local have, I think, once, I would say in a century, have come together for the first time. By the time everyone was excited, literally, like majority of the community in Ethiopia, majority of the community, in the diaspora, were in support of his actions and his moves, because majority of the actions were taken that would kind of, trigger everyone in their situations. So I felt the urge to document it, but, still, even if I was also by the time in support of his actions for majority of it, I was a little bit scared of how rule and regulations and legislation hasn't been per se maintained. It was more or less like an individual, just ruling out and ordering things instead of like checking up with new laws or old ones, kind of confirming with, the three major aspects of governance, the lawmakers and so on. So all this fear I passed by. So I kind of captured it in my newspaper by the time, which was still, again, using that sarcasm, that sort of ambiguity within it. And I remember one headline on the cover page was talking about, the headline says, as, I quote, the Prime Minister have received a Nobel Peace Prize. And mind you, this time was just a year before actually he actually have received it. He have later on received the prize. But I was not prophetic, if that's what you think now. It was actually a conversation on the social media for the actions that he have made. Everyone was talking about like him should be nominated for that prize. Well, I mean, you know, for the work one has done, there has to be a reward, such as the prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. But again, for my situation, for my liking, and you know, to my knowledge, it was a little bit too early to just nominate someone for like what they have done within the 6-7 months time of his position in power. So it was a little bit a fear. So what I did was, you know, the prime minister have received the Nobel Peace Prize was the headline, but when you go deeper into the details, it actually talks about Winston Churchill, the UK prime minister, receiving the prize not for his, you know, governance, but in literature, basically. So it was only the headline talking about the prime minister without referring any, you know, particular prime minister. And by default, you would assume, because of the talk of the town by the time, it was the Ethiopian prime minister who have received it. So this kind of methods that I have used. And now fast forward to just give you a little bit on what I have recently made in connection to the, you know, As You Go project here. You know, my project initially was, you know, a dry research at the beginning of what it was like for an Ethiopian and Chinese relationship. You know, when was it started, how it evolved, what kind of modalities it took, and so on and so forth. But then, you know, I kind of didn't see the urgency to be that, I don't know, researcher who develops a material out of the actual research, because as many inputs as there are out there on the internet, there is still also like a missing link on what is actually going on, what kind of relationship that they actually have on the ground when it comes to, you know, governing bodies in Ethiopia and governing bodies in China, the business leaders from China and here, you know, the import and export, the infrastructure, and particularly also the One Belt, One Road project. That's not only about Ethiopia, but of course, in a broader sense of it, which is almost a global context. So I decided to kind of tune my perspective towards a different direction. That is to take this production of newspaper some 30 years from now on. So it's a futuristic newspaper that I decided to produce, where I am a 63 years old artist who is invited by the Chinese government to celebrate, what is it called? 101 year anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, but also actually the closure of the One Belt, One Road project, which would be 2049. And I assume myself to be invited to China, to Hong Kong, to do an exhibition in January 2050, 50, as an 63 years old artist who would reflect using the same handwritten newspaper, who would reflect the 50 years journey all the way back. Well, not 50 exactly, but the 2013 all the way to 2049 journey of One Belt, One Road project, but also beyond, which includes in my newspaper to look a little bit to the future and to assume that China would launch a new project after closing the One Belt, One Road project, would launch a new project in 2053, project called One Planet, One Orbit. You know, the previous one is One Belt, One Road, OBOR, and this one is One Planet, One Orbit, which is OPO. And One Planet, One Orbit is a kind of continuation of that ambition to kind of build this huge belt to connect, you know, Europe, Asia, America, a little bit, well, particularly Europe, Asia, Africa. And in the One Planet, One Orbit project, the ambition extends to planets, basically. So it talks about Chinese government opening up new embassies in Venus, in Mars, and so on. And well, you know, you probably would get at some point to get to feel what the newspaper contents are, but it transcends between, you know, a robotics Olympic that was initiated a few years back from 2050 to contents that talks about Ethiopia, for instance, being, you know, kind of assisted to govern by the Chinese government for a, you know, 6 months period because of instability somehow. I don't know, in the middle of 2020, no, 2030 something, all the way to other contents that talk about, you know, Chinese official languages expanding into Amharic and so on, and also Ethiopia embracing, you know, Chinese language as one of the official languages because of, you know, exchange for population and so on. But yeah, so this kind of modality was actually an interesting point for me, not only to kind of creatively engage information that's not yet out there, which is like an assumption of what would come. You know, again, the sarcasm being a drive force to incorporate fear, for instance, or my anticipation, my interest, or directions that I'm not fully excited about, let's say, or directions that are like scary. Let's say one of the cases would be a Sri Lanka port, for instance, that has been now leased out somehow for 99 years or so to be owned and maintained and administrated by the Chinese government due to a credit that the Sri Lankan government, I believe, couldn't keep up to pay. So this kind of things are quite scary and sort of also a bit, you know, envisioning what's going to come up in the future. And using all these methods, again, to only produce one newspaper, which is not duplicatable or like intentionally not going to be disseminated as other news outlets, like, you know, making a copy of other newspapers or making a tabloid version or making a soft copy version to distribute to others. It is particularly also, you know, a tiresome process of, you know, developing research at the beginning and then going all the way through, you know, making an editorial selections and then working on each and every content and again, you know, the layout and producing the newspaper entirely by hand and only to keep it in the studio or, you know, to an extent to exhibitions, has become an interesting phenomenon of like inverting how a newspaper and you know, a destination of information and news has been, and how it kind of has to come back to all the way to how we started producing newspapers and magazines. And I could mention one example before I finish my my presentation here, which is, you know, when I started the newspaper, I went back to Ethiopian history of, you know, writing and history of publication. And one of the motifs that I use is to write with black and red ink, as you've heard me while I was reading the commands, is particularly driven from one, the Ethiopian Orthodox manuscripts And the other thing is it's also linked to publications during the Derg period, the military period, back in 40 years or so. And that has been also the drive force for my color and thematic sort of approach to it. But then also again, when you look back into Amro newspaper, which was produced 120 years ago now, I assume. Amro newspaper was believed to be the first newspaper that was published during the Emperor Menelik time here in Ethiopia. And initially it was, I believe it was 20 copies of a handwritten information about trade and diplomatic relationships Ethiopia has with others. And it was supposed to be only to be distributed to ministerial offices within the kingship. And later on, it evolved into becoming a machine duplicated newspaper, where it has led towards a printing press and so on. So I kind of wanted to go back to that scenario. Not only the format is interesting, but it's also because that contents that I produce, let's say, even within my own project now, contents that I have been producing since 2014 all the way to present have been interestingly, kind of active enough even with the current Ethiopia. So if I go back to the newspaper that I did in 2015 and flip through and select one issue, it could talk about maybe a land policy or a riot somewhere or someone getting imprisoned. It would actually exactly be the same scenario even to the present day of Ethiopia. And maybe it's only the change of names and locations, but still, all this old newses, assumed to be old newses, being active to the present Ethiopia, also is something that also kind of keeps me going to continue to work on it, because at the end of the day, there is no rotten news that gets old and that gets destroyed. All those newses that has been reported 10 years ago, 8 years ago, are still also similar when it comes to stability, governance, peace in Ethiopia. I would stop right here, and I'd be looking forward for having question and answer sessions to cover more on the newspaper. Thank you all for your time. Amasagnalo.
Thank you, and Robel presentation. The Q&A session. So, please in page of Curating Do, and our technical team is going to pass it to Alex today. So, while we are waiting for questions, I would invite Maria and Robel to join me. I know we had a lot with Robel's presentation, but the team is telling me that he has now a bit of unstable internet connection. So, are you with? We lost him. Unfortunately, he was saying that his electricity okay, I think Robel is with us. Can you hear me, Robel? I guess no. suggest that we maybe wait for a few seconds. Robel, can you hear us? No. Okay, so I think we have lost Robel. I hope he can join us in. But Maria, what actually struck me, like listening yours and Robel's presentation, is the way how, in an interesting way, they complement each other, and their ways of producing a knowledge where your presentation and the mode of kind of working throughout the project is through trying to collect data and really kind of collect the facts, while actually Robel has went in a different direction, trying to kind of create some fictional proposition, and really, like, listening to you two tonight made me really think that maybe facts are not the whole truth, and maybe to actually articulate the truth we need a fiction or the elements of fiction. So I don't know, what are you thinking on that, or do you have any response?
I really like his project, especially since the news media are a hot topic in Slovenia now too. And I think it's really interesting to see if we consider it like an artistic project, right? Just the importance of actually having some type of sources, but then also realizing that all of these sources are kind of biased, right? Because I do believe that if we want to have a somewhat accurate picture of what is happening, you need to indulge with all of the possible sources, right? But also we live in a world where these sources are becoming more and more, and you kind of get lost in them. And the more you indulge, the more you get lost, basically. Not that you know more, you kind of know less. So I do think there needs to be also this kind of jump in thinking to kind of come to a conclusion.
And when you were speaking about your way of working and difficulties with like collecting the data, did you have an impression how much of those things are top-down strategies, and how much actually of these programs and exhibitions and projects, festivals, were actually embedded or part of actual institution's identity or urge to produce kind of different kind of internationalism within those institutions? Did you have a possibility to actually grasp into those aspects?
I would say no. I think most of the news articles that I read about this were very sparse, and for just some of the exhibitions I could actually find information on the web pages of the institutions, because the institutions a lot of the times only had like a page saying this exhibition is happening, not much described, not anything. And then all of the news articles that I read about it were, as I said also in my presentation, they weren't talking a lot about the art or about the artists. They were mostly just talking about the BRI, trying, to connect all these different types of countries. So for me, it was very easy to kind of grasp what the point of these projects is, but it's rather hard to see the full picture of the content that is being presented. A lot of the exhibitions also articles also didn't include pictures from the exhibitions, so I couldn't even see the actual art that was there.
It's quite amazing that actually in a time of, internet era, we are actually also struggling to find the proper information about these kind of exhibitions or cultural events, which also kind of, brings a lot of questions.
Yeah, that was interesting to me because you would think that for at least these bigger exhibitions that they would get a bit more media coverage, especially since on a lot of the exhibitions there were a lot of artists and they were really big exhibitions, some with even like 100 artworks and things, but they really didn't get a lot of media coverage, I think, at least in my opinion. And a lot of the there was like one main article and then it was copied like 10 times on 10 different pages, but no new information.
Thank you. I think we have a Robel again with us. So I'm going to try to ask the question in response to Maria's presentation in regards to the Balkans. I know that your newspaper, Addis newspaper, China issue from the future in 2050 also has an art section. And can you a little bit tell us about your art section that is within the newspaper? How did you imagine it and conceptualize it? And also, I wanted to ask you a little bit to talk about this on whether there is any actual cultural exchange between Ethiopia and China, given that you're also working within a university, besides being an artist, and how much of that has an impact on cultural sector and art practitioners in your context. I think we lost him again. No, yes. Maybe we can just go with the sound if it's possible. Okay. Robel, can you hear us? Okay, I think unfortunately doesn't work. Okay, I'll go. Maybe we can try one more time with Robel, but I wanted to ask Maria. Because it's your project is going through different research stages, and you said that you have tried to unpack some of the content of the exhibitions that you were collecting data with our partner cells from China, Rockbund Art Museum, through the workshops to understand what those artists' artworks actually mean within the local context of China. So what will be your next step in research working with this material that you have now?
Yeah, so for now, I'm a bit afraid to talk about Chinese art because I'm not very familiar with it, so I don't really have an eye for it. So my next step will firstly be to dive into Chinese art a little bit more so that I maybe can see some things that are, as of right now, hidden to me, right? As I also said in my presentation, these are just like my initial thoughts as a layman when I first see these things, what comes to my mind. But again, I don't think that's, it's not educated guesses. It's just my initial thoughts. So I really need more background knowledge on Chinese art to be able to say it. Because even when I say that it's not contemporary, you know, I don't really know. I think my views are pretty clouded, but what I know from my local context to be contemporary, right? So definitely learn more about it before I can attempt to do a textual analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I think of great helps are our colleagues in China who can actually pack those complexity of parallel art worlds in China very well. And I think we have Robel again. I can try again asking questions. And please, if you do have any questions, please type in. So Robel, can you hear us? No, seems that it's not working. We cannot hear Robel. But I think if there is no questions from audience, I think we can close today's session. And I think Robel's situation with internet is a reminder that that the world that we are living is very complex and uneven, and that it's not that all of us have very stable internet connection and can stay in home and enjoy being safe throughout the pandemic. And this is one of the very important things that I have learned running this project over a year. And I think this is also something that really made me think a lot, thinking about analog. And this is why I find so precious the idea of handwritten newspaper in the internet age, and how that newspaper actually limited the access. But at least we were lucky to hear Robel about his project. I will close our session today. I'm going to have a big thank you to Moderna Galerija team. They're amazing staff, and I'm hoping that they will all stay safe and stay healthy, and the others that will recover very, very fast. And I would like to thank Maria for being with us in the project for so long, working from very tough conditions of constant lockdowns, as well as Robel going through many different ups and downs throughout the last year. I also want to thank my technical team who is behind this and remote controlling us. And I would like to invite you for tomorrow's sessions that is going to start at the same time, at the same place, and it will be co-streamed through Facebooks of our partner cells, same as today. Thank you very much. And tomorrow our moderator will be a dear colleague of mine, Nikita Inchintsai from Times Museum. I will be here as well to welcome you. Stay safe. Have a great day.